All right. Hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And today I have a special treat for the fans. It's always a special treat, but this time this is going to be a very short video. But basically, it's in response to a couple fan requests that I had. So the first one is from somebody all of you guys know who's produced a couple of short 5 to 10 minute videos. Um, uh, Harry Stark, and I've posted that up on my Real Seekers thing. And guess what? He's worked in collaboration with me again to do a short video, 5 minute video on the Shroud of Turin, based on my research. Now, he's produced his own take of my research. There are a couple mistakes in the video and stuff, things that I disagree with. There are also some things that I think need to be updated. Obviously, he's going based on my 2018 work, whereas I have some more updates that I'm going to be working on, hopefully getting done this summer, and updating that for my Shroud solo show for you guys. But yeah, basically it's more or less good. I would say it's about 90 to 95% perfect and spot on, and will help you kind of. He does a great job of summarizing my research and looking at what are the features of the Shroud of Turin's images and how does that relate to the various image forming mechanisms and why we can falsify it and argue for radiation or some kind of religion authenticating miracle. These images are miraculous. So I'll play that at the end, Harry Stark's video on the Shroud there. But I also had another fan, and I'm not going to give this person's name just in case it came through my Real Seekers feedback. I don't know if they want me revealing their details or not. But they alerted me to this video of a Shroud skeptic. And he's done a short 5 minute video kind of refuting a pro Shroud TikTok video. He asked me if I could please give a response to it. So guess what? Your wish is my command. Let's do that now, because I realize my fans, you guys have been a bit Shroud deprived. And I know in the month of August, you're going to be Shroud deprived because I'm taking a break from podcasting until September at least. So here's your little Shroud fix in the meantime. So let's take a look at this guy's video here. Let me share my screen. And we'll take this entire screen, share sound. Okay, and add to the stream. Didn't make the same mistake this time. Cool, so you peeps are all seeing that. All right, so here's our Shroud skeptical buddy. So I'm going to play the first little couple minutes, and then I'll respond to it.
We have real blood, proven scientifically. We have an image that's neither painted, nor photographed, nor scorched, nor rubbed, or in any...
And just so you know, this YouTuber, the Shroud skeptic here, so great that he's doing videos related to Shroud. He's got 25,000 subscribers. That's great. It's just too bad he's totally wrong in everything he says. But yeah, Dan McClellan, thanks for doing a video on the Shroud to at least to alert people to it. No, one thing just to mention here quickly, Dan has no clue who this guy is. I think everyone in my audience knows who this is. This is one of the world's most famous and knowledgeable experts on the Shroud, and he happens to be pro-Shroud. Barry Schwartz, the official photographer of the STIRT project in 1978. So, Dan, I would just recommend you need to know who this guy is. If you don't have an intellectual right to an opinion on the Shroud. I'll just say that. But yeah, let's continue, and let's uninterrupted let him play at least for a couple minutes, just so we can get the context of his first two major objections to the Shroud.
Way made by the hand of a man.
Hey everybody, this is a selective and an inaccurate representation of the data regarding the Shroud of Turin. This is not how scientific analysis works. To begin, the preponderance of evidence has long supported and continues to support the conclusion that the Shroud is an artistic production of the late 13th to the late 14th centuries CE. We have multiple different carbon-14 analyses that agree with that rough range, and that actually...
Sorry, I shouldn't be interrupting, but just I want to correct that. Multiple carbon-14 analyses? No, we have one that was done in 1988. There was another one that supposedly took place and gave a date of the 1st century, the time of Jesus, not the medieval period. But that there's a lot of skepticism attached to that. It's not a reliable date at all. But And there's some questions about what happened with that. So you can't rely on that claim that's out there at all. But yeah, there was one carbon dating, and 3 labs dated it in 1988. So I'm not sure what you're talking about here. There haven't been multiple carbon-14 analyses on the shroud.
Supports research that was conducted before the carbon-14 analyses that suggested the same date range based on artistic considerations. Now, there have been attempts to discredit those carbon-14 analyses by suggesting that samples were corrupted because a fire burned the shroud, or because the samples were taken from a part of the shroud that had been repaired. But none of those are supported by any data at all, and they would not produce the results that were found anyway. So the carbon-14 analyses continue to be salient and to be strong evidence of the medieval production of the shroud. Now, this individual suggests that it was not produced by a handful of different means and was not produced by the hands of a man. And this is just ludicrous. There are competing theories for the means of producing the image on the shroud. None of them are conclusive, but very few of them have been conclusively falsified either. And even if they all had been falsified, that would not remotely falsify human-made production altogether. That's not how this works.
Cool. Okay, so you got this. There are about 2 to 3 claims here, right? So number one, the carbon-14 dating is salient and proves that the shroud is a medieval fake still. Number 2, there was independent artistic analysis. Again, he doesn't specify as to what he means, but so he just gives a general assertion. Okay. But apparently there was independent artistic proof that this is, again, a 13th or 14th century medieval artistic fake. And also he kind of goes against the methodology, where he is right to an extent that he says, look, there have been... well, I'll get to it. That basically his other argument is that it's stupid for the pro shroud side to say, well, look, all of the artistic mechanisms have been falsified. Therefore, the shroud is an authentic miracle or something like that. He's saying, look, that's just a stupid conclusion. It's not true. Secondly, even if it was, that's not the proper methodology or proper reasoning. So those are the claims. So let's start with them in order. Let's start with the carbon-14 dating then. So this is something that I've worked with the world's experts in that. I've even contacted actual carbon-14 scientists from the lab, such as Oxford, one of the 3 labs that dated the carbon-14. I also am friends with Hugh Ferry, who is or has communicated with scientists in these labs and others and that sort of thing. Okay, so does the carbon-14 dating prove that the shroud is medieval fake? No, it's been scientifically proven or defeated, as a philosopher would say, and we have various explanations that have been attempted or given by the pro shroud side to explain why can't we rely on the carbon-14 dating, and furthermore, how do we explain it then? If the shroud is first century, why on God's green earth? This is a scientific result that was obtained by the labs. Why did the shroud date to the 14th century then, if that's the case? And my fans, you guys will be familiar with me going over this in detail. And for example, with the experts on my Shroud panel review show, part 1 with Bob Rucker and Hugh Ferry. I've done multiple shows on the carbon dating. For example, one of my favorite is between Bob Rucker and Joe Marino. They're both pro shroud, but they have different explanations, including one of the ones that Dan mentions here. So yeah, look for those. I'll include those in my blog, the links to those shows. But yeah, so essentially there have been, that should say 5. Let me just change that because I've updated this. So there have been 5 types of proposals by the pro shroud proponents to explain the carbon dating. Why did it get a medieval date? If the shroud is first century, what the heck happened? So there have been a couple of conspiracy theories, and I think that these have been subsequently falsified or that they're improbable to be true. So we can't rely on conspiracy theories, although some of them are possible, I would say. They're possibly true. There have also been ordinary contamination theories. So he mentions these things like fire. or other things. There's been multiple suggestions of bioplastic coating. There's been wax or tallow found on the shroud, and all of these would affect the carbon-14 dates. Now, Dan is correct that going for this option, at least in isolation, it's not going to work. Even if it's true, it's not going to make a first century date give a medieval result. So this explanation has been falsified, at least in isolation. It alone, ordinary contamination alone, is not going to get a first century shroud to give a medieval carbon-14 date. So that is true. However, he says there's no data or evidence. This is just erroneous. It is a scientifically proven fact, the same level of degree that we can prove the Earth is round, that there was contamination on the Shroud of Turin. And this was confirmed by the carbon-14 scientists themselves, like Harry Gove or Walter McCrone, who observed scientifically these things and proved through multiple lines of evidence that there were various contaminants on the Shroud of Turin in the area that they tested that would throw off the carbon-14 dates. Again, not enough to give a medieval date with a first century cloth, but nonetheless throw off the dates. And the question really is, well, how good were their cleaning techniques? Did they clean it and get rid of it totally off? There's some people like Pam Moon who've actually went to the Oxford labs and examined stuff, and they would argue, no, it wasn't quite good enough. There was still this contamination that was done at the time of the testing, and this threw off the results, or at least played a partial role. Then there's Joe Marino, the invisible reweave hypothesis. And this is one that's really is viable. This alone can explain, if true, the radiocarbon erroneous dates, why it gave a medieval date. And Dan says that there's no proof or data supporting this. Look, I am not a supporter of the invisible reweave hypothesis. I'm happy if it is true. I think it is a plausible theory that deserves to be respected, whereas the other ones, ordinary contamination conspiracy theories, I don't think they're not plausible in my view. But this one is plausible and deserves to be respected. And Joe Marino, he's the guy who invented the theory, one of my friends as well. And he's done extensive documentation of the evidence and scientific data that we have that is suggestive of the invisible reweave theory. Now, obviously, there are counter explanations to it because, like I said, I don't believe this theory is true. So there are other ways to explain the data. And there's also counter evidence against the invisible reweave theory. And we have to be fair in looking at it. But I just wanted to point out that Dan just kind of dismissing the invisible reweave of people like Joe Marino, someone who's written, he's written this great book, which, I've done shows with him. I've linked to his work, go to his academia page. But yeah, this amazing book, the 1988 Carbon-14 Dating of the Shroud of Turin, a stunning expose by Joe Marino. My goodness, this is, if you want the invisible reweave hypothesis, this is the top of the crop. Joe Marino is I would say he's the world's expert in the invisible reweave hypothesis. Again, he's the one who first hypothesized it, right? Over 900 pages. Trust me, he documents, there is data. Whether that data is sufficient to prove that the invisible reweave hypothesis is true or not, that's another question. I would probably agree with you, Dan, that it's not, because I don't think that the invisible reweave is true. But yeah, don't just say, oh, it's just, there's no data for it. No, you have to be fair and charitable to my friend Joe. There is evidence and data. So just wanted to leave it at that. Okay, so that's going back for the carbon dating. Now, there also are extraordinary forms of contamination that have been proposed. So John Jackson proposed carbon monoxide, which would throw off the carbon-14 dating. Again, if true, it would work. It would give a first century shroud a medieval date. Now, this was scientifically tested by Christopher Ramsey at Oxford Radiocarbon Labs, and it has been subsequently falsified. So this one isn't plausible or true anymore. And then finally, we have Bob Rucker and people like Mark Antonacci go for this, the neutron absorption hypothesis. This is my personal theory as well. And this, again, is basically at the event of the resurrection. We had a first century shroud, and a bunch of neutrons were emitted during that resurrection event. And the neutrons would throw off, it's been scientifically and mathematically proven, the first century shroud, to give the precise dates we got in the medieval period in 1988. And again, Bob's been on my show multiple times. You can see his model. He has calculated this out. He is a world's expert in this area. He's a nuclear physicist or nuclear engineer, and he's worked with the I'm blanking on the name for some reason. I'm wanting to say MCAP, but that's not what it is. The Monte Carlo neutron. Anyways, the United States government has a software program that does this calculating, and he used that to calculate his model and prove. And by the way, the most famous, knowledgeable, and ultimate shroud skeptic in the world, Hugh Ferry, who's also a friend of mine, has been on the show, has confirmed that the neutron absorption hypothesis has not been falsified yet and is an equally probable explanation for the carbon-14 data. And on my panel review show part 1, he admits the carbon-14 data alone by itself proves jack shoot. It is not salient, precisely because this neutron absorption hypothesis is still out there as an equal probability. If you want to believe the shroud's medieval, you have to falsify the neutron absorption hypothesis, or at least show it to be improbable. That has not been done yet. So yeah, the carbon-14 data is not salient. It proves nothing, and you have no right to believe the shroud is medieval on the basis of the medieval dating alone. On the basis of the carbon-14 dating alone. Great. The next claim he said is that, where is he? Okay, so he also said, look, independently, artists have studied the shroud. He is an artist, he mentions at one point, but art experts and art historians have studied the shroud, and they have independent reasons, even without the carbon dating, to think the shroud is medieval. Again, he gets into no details and stuff. So I'm rather than assuming what he's talking about, because I've refuted all these types of claims, there are at least a couple things he might be referring to here. But yeah, look, he just gives out a general assertion. So I'm just going to give out a general assertion from probably the world's expert, though, PhD art historian, someone who knows better than Dan. And guess what? This isn't a pro-shroud guy. He doesn't believe in miracles. He's not even a Christian. This is a non-religious agnostic, the art historian and agnostic, non-religious agnostic, Dr. Thomas DeWeselo. Let's watch his 4-minute clip here. What does he say about, oh yeah, all art historians, they've independently proven that the shroud is just the exact same as medieval art, other medieval artwork. Don't think so, Dan. Let's pay attention to Tom here.
As an art historian, I study imagery from the 13th and 14th century, like the picture you see on the right. Now, if the shroud is a medieval image dating from around this period, art historians like me ought to be able to look at it and study it and tell you who painted it, how they painted it, where it was painted, and so on. But we can't. And the reason is that it's not like any medieval image. Here's one obvious problem. The image you see on the left is the image on the shroud. This is the cloth image, just showing the facial area. Now, it's a very sort of mysterious mask, but it contains an extraordinary secret. Because when you photograph it, and this was done for the first time at the end of the 19th century, you discover that tonally reversed, that odd mask, which is all people would have seen in the Middle Ages, it contains this extraordinary, astonishingly realistic, positive image. It's amazingly realistic, like a photo. Now, this would have been completely beyond anyone painting in the 14th century. I show you on the right, this wonderful painting by Simone Martini. It's an artist I've studied. And it shows you how people were painting the face of Christ in the 14th century. Now, it's very obviously stylized. You can see the brush strokes, you can see the outlines. unlike the Shroud image, which is basically just like a modern photo. Now, here's a second reason why that image on the Shroud can't be a medieval image. No one in the Middle Ages knew about negative images. No one knew about negative images until the discovery of photography in the 19th century. And no one in the Middle Ages would have wasted their time, even if they could have done, producing an image like you see on the left that you could only appreciate if you photographed it, and then you could see the true quality of the image, the amazing figure in the middle. So, in my view, it just doesn't make sense as a medieval image. There's another reason as well, and that's that the image is vanishingly faint. It's so faint that if you get closer than about 6 feet away.
If you had a choice, would you rather pay $12 for this cheese grater on Amazon or pay less than $2 on?
It melts into the cloth. You can't actually see it. So no one could have produced an image that they couldn't even see that when they were making it. From an art historian's point of view, there's another reason to doubt that this could be a medieval work of art. If you wanted to fake a holy shroud in the Middle Ages, you didn't need to create a forgery so brilliant that scholars like me and scientists working in the 21st century would be fooled by it. All you needed to do was to paint one. And what I've got on the right of the screen there is the Holy Shroud of Besançon. Well, it's actually an accurate copy of it because it was destroyed in the French Revolution. Now, this was very obviously just a medieval painting. You can see how stylized it is. But until it was destroyed, this shroud was thought to be an authentic relic of Christ's burial. This image was thought to be a miraculous imprint. So you didn't need to forge the perfect forgery in the Middle Ages. People were gullible in those days, especially when it came to religious relics. In short, the idea that the shroud is a medieval work of art is simply untenable. It doesn't look like a medieval work of art, it's not made like one, and it's certainly not conceived like one. And that's why art historians like me, or not like me actually, have completely ignored the Shroud of Turin over the course of the last century. It just doesn't fit into the history of art.
All right, so I think you guys get the point there, right? So, I mean, oops, Dan, look, again, you gave no details and stuff. I've done entire shows on these types of arguments from art history and stuff where I go into the details. So I just recommend that you and your audience go and check out the depths on Real Seekers and, you know, some of my panel review shows with the world's experts on the Shroud of Turin, for example. But yeah, since you just give a vague, bold assertion, general assertion that there are, art historians believe had independent evidence. Well, here's an art historian, the world's expert in medieval art history, and non-religious, not a Christian. He's a non-religious agnostic, an expert in the field, and he's just saying no. So if I just have general claims, I believe him, not you. Period. But yeah, so that argument totally fails. That claim is just not true. And again, if you want to get into the details as to why Dr. Thomas de Westlo is saying this, we can do that because I've done entire shows on that. Anyways, okay, so back to the third and final claim in this segment that he says. So I think. Look, so he's wrong factually about, because I've written 300 pages on the Shroud, as everyone knows, and I've gone through all of the ordinary artistic mechanisms that are known to man and absolutely conclusively falsified them. They lack one or more of ability to explain the minimal relevant features on the Shroud of Turin. And this is why world's experts and scientists who are not even Christians, like Barry Schwartz at the beginning of the clip that you had there, Dan, from the Twitter video. That's why even they believe. That's why that non-religious agnostic, Dr. Thomas de Westlo, he believes the Shroud is authentic as well, at least historically authentic, based on the evidence and that sort of thing. Because he knows, look, there are no artistic techniques. It is scientifically impossible for that to be a painting. It is scientifically impossible for that to be a powder rubbing or some other such artistic mechanism that would have existed in the 14th century. Now you can always appeal to, well, isn't it possible there was some unknown, maybe some medieval genius invented laser beams and he created the shroud? Yeah, but that, even if you want to claim that as a possibility, I would say it's not. But, taking the jokes aside, sure, it's always going to be possible that there's some unknown mechanism we haven't thought of, but that's not probable. Possibility is not probability, and the rational person follows the probability and follows the evidence where it goes. Secondly, I would say you're just basing this off a 2-minute TikTok video or something. So I get the feeling that you don't know too much about pro-shroud scholarship, but no shroud scholar in the world that I know of uses the methodology or reasoning of, well, we don't know how it was made, therefore God. Nobody does that. That's just a straw man and a caricature. People like me, I specialize as a philosopher in miracles and criteria by which we can identify a given event as a miracle of God. So there's more to it. I would say that's part of my case. We do need to falsify the known artistic mechanisms and deal with those hypotheses, right? And we've done that conclusively. And I've done entire shows on this. But there's additional criteria that's met. And certain pro-shroud experts, people like Bob Rucker or Mark Antonacci, John Jackson, Giulio Fonte, they've actually come up and published in peer-reviewed papers, mind you, hypotheses of their own that fit all of the data or properties of the shroud images far better than anything the artistic techniques can do. So yeah, a lot of them have made abductive arguments, basically an inference to the best explanation. And things like radiation hypotheses, or in Fonte's case, electrostatic mechanisms, something like this, are far better at explaining all of the shroud image features that you don't even mention, but that Thomas de Westlo mentioned a few of them. The artistic mechanisms from the medieval period don't even come close. They fail several of those features in order of providing an explanation for them. So again, I know that you have no idea what I'm talking about, but go to Real Seekers on YouTube and check out some of my solo shows or some of my upcoming panel review shows with the experts, where we're going to be looking at some of these ordinary artistic mechanisms and why we know for a scientifically proven fact that they fail. So yeah, in a way, you're right that alone is not how it works. But you're wrong that, trying to falsify the various artistic mechanisms that have been proposed is just meaningless. No, that's an essential and necessary part of the pro-shroud case that needs to be taken seriously. Okay, so let's continue on with your next claim.
So this individual is not particularly scientifically informed. Now, there are a number of other considerations that point to the artistic origin of the image on the shroud. To me, as an artist, what immediately jumps out is the proportion of the body. It's disproportionate. To begin, a corpse laying on its back with its hands crossed has its hands over its belly. They don't extend all the way down to cover the genitals. That is an intentional choice based on modesty. In order for the crossed hands of a corpse to cover its genitals, the elbows have to be intentionally propped up and projected forward to get the hands all the way down there. Additionally, the fingers are grotesquely long on the hands of this corpse. And there are other aspects to the anatomy that are just wildly disproportionate, as people have noted for many years. There has also been blood splatter analysis done on the blood stains that appear on the image on the shroud, and they indicate that it's not consistent with the application of the shroud to a corpse laying on its back, but rather the blood flow on the shroud indicates that blood was applied while whatever was underlying the shroud was in different positions. So all of this is supportive of an artistic origin for the shroud, probably between the late 13th and late 14th century CE. But let's take a look at what this...
Okay, so that's the next little section here. Okay, so anatomical inaccuracies and as well the BPA analysis. Back in 2018, a peer-reviewed Journal of Forensic Sciences by the atheist Luigi Garlashelli, who's a chemist, and his other biased atheist partner. So yeah, right away we can just dismiss the BPA thing as just being biased. It was funded by an atheist organization. I can't trust a single thing they say. We could say that. We're going to do better. This guy is at least mentioning substantive points. So rather than just dismissing it based on an ad hominem, Luigi Garlashelli is a biased atheist. That's a proven fact. But in terms of the substance of the blood flow patterns, this has been scientifically refuted over and over again in the peer-reviewed literature. The pro-Shroud world's experts have all addressed this and falsified the fact that these series of 6 experiments is what they did in any way prove the Shroud Man is an artistic fake. And it basically comes down to their experiments were totally irrelevant. They don't prove anything regarding the Shroud Man because they're not appropriate. They don't, first of all, they make certain false presuppositions. Obviously, every pro-Shroud expert in the world admits that, yeah, blood flows would have gotten onto the Shroud in different positions while they carried the body, perhaps while they took the body down from the cross. Obviously, some of the blood flows formed while he was up there on the cross. That's why they reflect angles that are different than these guys are supposing, and stuff like that. Or it would have changed as he breathed up and down. Also, what was the position of the body as it was carried to the tomb? When it was put in the tomb, we know from things like the Sudarium of Oviedo that it was in at least 2 different positions for a number of period of time, forming different types of bloodstains on the Sudarium and that sort of thing. So, and then there's questions of, okay, was the body washed or not? Was it only merely partially washed? So that, yeah, basically the experiments don't take into account any of these possibilities for, well, how did certain blood flows form on the body and then get encoded onto the Shroud and that sort of thing. There's also just think about it. The type of blood they used was not consistent with the blood of a man who had just been scourged, crucified, would have been in hypovolemic shock. This would have affected the viscosity of the blood and how it flowed on a human body. They just basically used runny red water for some of their experiments, at least. This is not consistent with what we'd expect, so it's totally irrelevant. They used a mannequin, and well, that's not consistent with an actual human torso, a human body at all. Are you telling me the plastic on a mannequin is consistent with human skin that had been tortured, scourged, crucified, all of that? No way. So this is just an example. I've done an entire hour-long show. I think it's my Shroud solo show, part 13B or 14B, somewhere around there. It's right after the direct contact hypothesis episode. I do a supplemental on this 2018 blood pattern analysis. I go into detail with pictures and images what their experiments were, and also explain why they just utterly failed to prove anything in terms of the Shroud being a artistic fake. Throw it in the garbage. They proves nothing. And all the experts agree, including a blood expert that Dan here is going to be quoting in the future part of his segment of his review here, Dr. Kelly Kearse, worldwide blood expert, who is kind of a Shroud agnostic. He doesn't like that term, but just to give you a sense of where he's coming from, even he admits these BPA analysis, complete rubbish. You're a fool if you think the Shroud is an artistic fake on the basis of that. And I'll play a clip from him when he was on my show saying that. So yeah, let me bring that up. Hang on. So here is Dr. Kelly Kearse talking about the 2018 blood pattern analysis and why it's complete bunk. Remember, this is a worldwide blood expert. He actually specializes in blood and immunology. So if it will work, of course, it never does when you want it.
Sources that I'm sure you're aware of is the recent BPA or blood pattern analysis experiments by Garlashelli last July. So yeah, that apparently it's been forensically proven. These bloodstains are fakes, artistic fakes. Yeah, what do you make of these experiments and their conclusion?
Yeah, so he's going to use try to look at the wound on the wrist to show the pattern of blood that runs down the arms, not the same on the shroud. Look at the pattern of blood from a side wound running down. It's not the same in the shroud. They use real blood. For some of the studies, they had anticoagulant added to it, also had preservative added to it, been in the refrigerator before a week. Anticoagulant, I don't know. That's a good route to realistically go. Other experiments were done with synthetic blood. Synthetic blood, sometimes when people use it, they'll put cornstarch in it to kind of thicken it up. It's not the real consistency you want. Now, he didn't use cornstarch or anything like that. But I don't know, if those are really a true fair test of what it might be. And I think the main issue, apart from those things, the anticoagulant, those experiments where that was used, and I don't think that's a really appropriate thing. But bigger than that, in general, I think there's just too many variables. What about some sweat, some grime on the arm? That could have certainly affected blood flow. Jesus would have been severely dehydrated. That would have affected the viscosity of the blood. Temperature, our blends work, and temperature could certainly have an effect on clotting. So I think there's just way too many variables. I don't think you can do a study like this and say, well, we found that it didn't match the pattern.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So there you go. Even Dr. Kelly Kearse himself, worldwide blood expert, and the expert that Dan over here is going to be citing later on to kind of refute some pro-Shroud claims. He says BPA, garbage. Throw it in the garbage. Junk. Proves nothing. So, okay, cool. So he also mentioned certain anatomical inaccuracies like the long fingers. And then, again, yes, everyone admits, even Stirp admits that there were some minor anatomical inaccuracies. But again, it's been scientifically proven through all of the forensic experts who really examined the shroud, from world's expert Frederick T. Zuggaby to Robert Buckland, who the show Quincy Jones was made after. We have people, non-religious agnostic, going back to the early 1900s, Yves Delage presenting to the French Academy of Sciences how amazingly anatomically accurate and medically accurate the Shroud Man is. So all of the experts, the vast majority of them, let's keep it real, the vast majority of them, and especially all of the ones who've actually studied the Shroud Man up close, seem to all agree that, yeah, this is anatomically accurate. And this has been scientifically proven in various computer anthropometric studies published in peer-reviewed journals, some of which I've linked to on my own blog, that have confirmed this finding. The Shroud Man is amazingly accurate, but there are some minor areas of inaccuracies, at least as they appear to the naked eye. The fingers do appear to be too long. I've done entire shows with the world's experts. There's lots of explanations for this, one of which is, again, the fingers are curved, right? And this will create a lengthening effect depending on what mechanism was used. So certainly if you believe in a supernatural radiation hypothesis, this can explain why the fingers appear long. There are other explanations. The point here is that we don't know what precisely caused the images on the shroud and whether or not that image forming mechanism would be conducive to creating a lengthening effect if the Shroud Man's fingers were curved. And I've had Dr. Andrew Silverman, worldwide forensic expert and medical expert. He mentioned this effect as explaining the long fingers and that sort of thing. In terms of the long arms, I've had worldwide, again, medical experts. Dr. Joseph Bergeron addressed this on my show. Mark Antinacci. Again, the body is in rigor mortis. We can see that from the Shroud Man, and it's evident that he is stiff, suggesting rigor mortis. There are other suggestions. So yeah, he was hunched over, and his shoulders were. Some people speculate maybe his shoulders were dislocated, but there's nothing. It is anatomically perfectly acceptable for him to be covering his groin. Jesus to be covering his groin area, hunched over in the position that he is reflected in the Shroud Man. He's not lying down flat on his back with a flat back. He's hunched over in a state of rigor mortis a bit. So these Shroud skeptics are just making inaccurate, false assumptions to try and disprove the shroud and say, oh, well, it's impossible for him to cover his groin. The other thing is there's a burn mark and a hole right where the shroud man's elbow is. So we can't really tell about that arm. Again, I've had the various medical experts address this specific objection, go to Real Seekers and see what they have to say. They're not all pro-shroud Christians. They're coming from different backgrounds and stuff. The latest of which was Dr. Andrew Silverman. I had a great convo with Dr. Joseph Bergeron and Thomas McGovern. These kinds of easy pickings, as they are, of the shroud skeptics have been addressed and refuted over and over again. And all of the peer-reviewed science suggests that the shroud man is anatomically accurate. That's what Sturp proved. So, okay, cool. So that's it for his 3 claims here. Let's finish him off with the last part of the video, and then I will respond.
Individual has to say about the blood that was analyzed on the shroud.
The thing that stopped me from accepting the shroud as authentic for years, 18 years, the blood on the shroud is still red. All blood should be black or brown. And no one could answer for 18 years, why is the blood on the shroud still red? Dr. Alan Adler, Jewish blood chemist, who proved, by the way, the blood on the shroud was blood, proved it. He and I were on the telephone, and then he told me something. The body goes into shock. Jesus was given no water, he was beaten, he was scourged. Consequently, he went into anaphylactic shock. After a period of time in this type of shock, the cell walls of the red blood cells begin to break down, floods the body, the bloodstream, with an enzyme called bilirubin. And when that happens, the blood stays red forever.
So this is known as the bilirubin theory, and this individual has misrepresented wildly what that research actually demonstrated, and more recent research has actually shown that the bilirubin theory is not an adequate explanation for the nature of the blood stains on the shroud. Here is a study published in 2020 in the Journal of Historical Archaeology and Anthropological Sciences that interrogates 2 leading theories for how this blood could appear the way that it does on the shroud, including the bilirubin theory, and it arrives at the conclusion that neither of these theories actually accounts for how human blood could maintain the appearance that it does on the shroud. But this individual also claims that this Dr. Adler conclusively proved that the blood on the shroud was actual blood. And that actually goes well beyond what Adler himself claims. He suggests that the evidence is strong that it is blood. But Adler also asserts that it is definitely primate blood. And that has also been called into question by more recent research. That same scientist published another study the same year in the journal Forensic Science International Reports, demonstrating that advances in the serological analysis of blood would produce an inconclusive result based on the findings from the early 80s, that we cannot confidently conclude that it was primate blood. It could have come from a number of different species. So we can't conclusively prove that the shroud is an artistic production from the late 13th to the late 14th centuries CE. But that's what the overwhelming preponderance of evidence supports, and objections to that theory arise overwhelmingly from misunderstanding, from misrepresentation, or from a place of dogmatism, not data.
Okay, so that's it for his little video there. But yes, come on. Okay, so get out of here. Okay, great. So yeah, so he makes these last couple of claims, and he cites Dr. Kelly Kears. Remember him? Oh, here he is. You should listen to this show. I cover everything with him on Real Seekers. But yeah, he's right. Kelly Kears has done some updates and stuff. And Alan, nothing is absolutely conclusively proven in science. So great, taking Barry Schwartz out of context as though, making a statement. I could do the same to you. I could rip you to shreds with some of the foolish, uninformed statements you've been making in your show, Dan. But I'm not going to, because again, it's evident. Look, you're making a short 5-minute video. Let's be charitable to you. I get it. I bet you, if I'm looking at this video that I'm making, I will be saying stuff slightly wrong or something like that. So look, he's just making a statement for a presentation. Barry, I know Barry personally. I've talked to him on the phone for hours and hours, some days and stuff like that. He knows the way science works. He was the official Sturp photographer in 1978. He saw the shroud and studied it with his own eyeballs. He knew all the scientists, including Dr. Alan Adler personally, and he knew what Alan Adler claimed. He's not wildly misrepresenting him. That's you wildly misrepresenting Barry and Alan Adler, by the way. But you're right. It's not, he didn't absolutely prove 100% degree that it's blood, but it is proven beyond all reasonable doubt. There is no one who is informed and knows the data, including Dr. Kelly Kears, the guy that you're citing here, who wrote those Shroud skeptical papers calling skepticism about, well, can we prove that it's primate blood? I agree with you. I agree that Kelly has given new evidence, and Barry even agrees that, yeah, Kelly has raised some important points. Both Barry and Kelly are personal friends. They're on the board at shroud.com, I think, or Stera or something like that. They're on the board together somewhere. But yeah, Barry recognizes the important contributions that Kelly has done in updating and nuancing some of Alan's claims. Now, Alan did have data for suggesting it was primate blood, but there have been updates in cross-reactivity, and you know, you've read that paper as to why he's saying, well, not so fast. We can rule out some things, but we can't specify it's primate yet. That doesn't mean it's not primate, and or that it's not human. And again, Kelly Kears goes on all the data in this show. So listen to that. For that, you know, what happened with Alan Adler and why he concludes what he does. But guess what Kelly Kears does not do? He does not support you. Those peer review papers say it is blood. You're a fool if you deny that there's blood and actual blood. That is proven beyond all reasonable doubt. You are unreasonable if you say that there's not actual blood on the shroud. Guess what? The ultimate shroud skeptic in the world, my personal friend, the most knowledgeable shroud skeptic, I would say, Hugh Ferry, he admits, yeah, it's absolutely proven there is actual blood on the Shroud of Turin. Now, he has a supplement. He also thinks that there's paint on there as well, or there's pigments for the blood as well. And interestingly enough, Giulio Fonte, who's pro-shroud, he would agree with that. He thinks that there is actual blood, and in the medieval period or the Renaissance, it was touched up with Venetian rouge pigments, and that's why it's red today or something like that. Again, I disagree with that. I follow Stirp and Barry Schwartz, and I don't think there's any pigment on the shroud apart from maybe one sample where there was some contamination. But yeah, no, it is absolutely proven. The shroud's bloodstains were composed of actual blood. Nobody denies this, not even the informed shroud skeptics like Hugh Ferry themselves. So yeah, you have to kind of follow the data. It's you that's not following the data, and it's dogmatism on your part. I think with you, what you have to do, Dan, is have an intellectual right to your opinion. You have to be a real seeker. It's not enough to just look at one side of the equation. You have to look at both sides. And I will admit, there is data from Dr. Walter McCrone on which to base the fact that there is paint on the shroud. There is credible scientific data that could be used to and was used to support this. It just comes down to, okay, well, what's all of the evidence combined? And when you look at all the evidence, including we do have an absolute proof that paint could not have been used for the body images. It's called a proteasis test that was done by Dr. Alan Adler and John Heller. That test alone is the absolute falsification on that front, because there was no pigments need to be used in a proteinous, gelatinous, protein-based binder. That's not there in the body images. So bada boom, bada bing, you're destroyed, shroud skeptics. Right there. But again, look at all the evidence in total, including the evidence that seems to be, that was used to argue in favor of the painting hypothesis, and make your way. I've done an entire show. My Shroud solo show part 7 and 8 is where I go into for hours. Part 8 specifically is where I spend over an hour, maybe an hour and a half, I think, detailing all of the evidence, pro and con, for the paint versus actual blood composition, and explain why we can prove it is, beyond all reasonable doubt, actual blood that's present on the shroud. What was the other thing you denied? So you are right about that. I take your point. We can't prove that it's primate or human blood yet, given the data. Kelly Kears has succeeded on that front. There was something else that you mentioned. There's another
produce
paper,
an inconclusive
there's another paper by Kelly.
result based on the findings.
Okay, so that's about species. Oh, the bilirubin and the redness and that sort of thing. Yep, again, and Barry has also admitted Kelly has raised some credible doubts or questions about that. I don't think Kelly Kierce has absolutely falsified the bilirubin theory or other theories. There are multiple natural theories. By the way, one thing that you missed out is that there are supernatural theories. And Mark Antonacci and physicist Dr. Arthur Lynn come up with what's called the historically consistent hypothesis. And Bob Rucker, the nuclear engineer, would probably agree with this as well. But there are credible reasons as to why the blood remains red. And scientist Giulio Fonte has actually written a peer-reviewed paper that I've linked to up on one of my blogs, where in one of the shows that he was in, talking about this issue and this, what the studies on the blood prove. So yeah, there are both natural and supernatural based explanations for why the blood is red, and you don't have to rely on this bilirubin thing. But again, the bilirubin theory shouldn't be just totally dismissed just because one man, Kelly Kierce, has written a paper raising doubts about it. Again, I respect Kelly. I tend to agree with him on most issues that he's raised, but again, he's not infallible. He's take his data, make up your own mind, but look at the other side as well. Look at the updates and the counter responses against what Kelly's come up with. I don't get any sense that you've really done that. I think you just, well, here's Kelly Kierce, a blood expert. He's saying what I want to hear. Therefore, I'm just going to assume he's right. That's not being a real seeker. That's not good enough to have a conclusion. That said, to be fair and charitable to you, Dan, obviously, what do I expect? This is a 5-minute video and you're responding to a TikTok, which is probably just a 2-minute video. So I get it. You can't go into the depths on everything and cover everything in detail. And especially if you're just making a quick little response video to a TikTok that you saw. But I do want to encourage you and the Shroud skeptics in your audience, on your own, do a little bit more, maybe dive in a little bit deeper into these things and realize that there's more to it than what you're presenting. And that, just looking at one side of the debate is you're never going to have a proper full understanding. This is why I always look at all sides of a given issue when I'm coming up with my opinions on the Shroud of Turin or the existence of God, whatever it is. Other than that, that's it for this little video. I'll stop sharing right now. And great. So that's my response. I hope that was good enough for you as a fan. And now what I'll do is I'm going to end off the video with Harry Stark's 5-minute summarization of my case for the Shroud evidence. Again, it's not quite representing me accurately, although the main essence of it is based on my work and stuff. There are just some minor things in terms of what he said that I would correct. For example, he says at the end, well, Mark Antonacci's radiation hypothesis is the only explanation that can fully explain the Shroud image features. That's not true. There, Bob Rucker's hypothesis. There's Giulio Fonte's new divine photography hypothesis. That even though John Jackson or Paulo de Lazaro, the UV hypothesis, I also think this works. Again, it does have the limitation in that it only covers the body images. It doesn't explain the blood stains. So that has to be explained independently. How did the blood stains get on the Shroud? And they just assume direct contact, which doesn't work, I think. So yeah, there are unknown supernatural mechanisms. So that's just an example, or there's a few other things where I'm like, well, that's not representing what I was saying and stuff, or it's not representing some of the updates I've had since 2018 and that sort of thing. But again, I give my stamp of approval, 90 to 95%. He's got my case summarized, and he did a great job. So thank you, Harry, for doing that. And over to the clip.
Is the Shroud of Turin authentic? The Shroud of Turin is a shroud that has been historically attributed as the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, but it acquired great skepticism during the 20th century. Most scholars accept the following facts about the Shroud of Turin. The shroud contains photographic negativity. The shroud contains a high resolution of body images and bloodstains. The shroud has intense uniformity of color on fibrils. The shroud has dense uniformity of frontal and dorsal maximum optical density. The shroud has substance uniformity operating on different materials. The shroud has tri-dimensional information. The shroud has continuous full-length frontal and dorsal images. There is an absence of body side and top of head images. There are vertically mapped wrapping distortions. There are non-contact zones that were encoded through empty space. There is an absence of capillary flow. There is non-saturation. There is a presence of body image superficiality. Anatomical accuracies are present, such as scourge marks. There is an absence of decomposition. There is a presence of bloodstain and body fluid. The shroud is directionless, which means there is an absence of brushstrokes. Fluorescence is absent on the shroud under ultraviolet illumination. Yellow oxidation is present on the shroud, which means paint is absent. There is an absence of layering on the shroud. There is an absence of dry powder on the shroud. There is an absence of spices, oils, or biochemicals. There is an absence of photosensitizers or silver. The hypotheses that have attempted to explain the Shroud of the Centuries are the following. The painting hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. For more information, pause the video and consult the list to the left. The powder rubbing or dusting hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The emulsion hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The boiled water or oil hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The engraved lines technique hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The proto-photograph hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The direct contact hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The gas diffusion hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The Volkringer method hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The singlet oxygen theory hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The bacterial or fungal theory hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The electrostatic theories hypothesis. There are several facts this hypothesis cannot account for. Therefore, this hypothesis is inadequate. The radiation theory by Mark Antonassi is the only explanation that can account for all facts. Therefore, this hypothesis should be selected. The original chemist of the Shroud, Raymond Rogers, revised his viewpoint on the Shroud of Turin and said, quote, "I am forced to conclude that the image was formed by a burst of radiant energy. Light, if you like." End of quote. The Shroud of Turin is authentic.